So that's how that book happened. The partition book never really happened, the one I wanted to write, and probably never will. But when Arpita Das of Yoda Press asked me to do this book because she had this idea, I just latched onto it because I said I'm the best guy to do it because it's something that I've interested with and something that I've followed over the years. And this would be the best opportunity for me to know so many different kinds of narratives across Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. And that's how this book happened.
And how did you become a graphic artist? Because not many people in India are still very comfortable with the idea of a graphic book also. Because many people see it as a kind of adult comic.
Adult comic. That's nice.
Or something like that. So
For the mature audience.
for the mature audience.
Parental guidance advised.
Yeah, parental guidance. Certification could also be coming. But anyways, how? Because still there is a lot of fascination for being the author of that kind, old-fashioned kind. People still strive to be that one. And why you just venture into something new, unexplored, where you know that people are not just going to easily accept this and all that.
Well, I didn't actually seek out looking a space for a shelf life to begin with. And that really hit me when I found my book on the emergency in the children's section of a bookshop, because we were comics and comics are equal to children, so we were into. So Delicam was a part of the book section, of the children's book section. But having said that, I started my own thing doing drawings and comics because I went to an art school, so I could draw, or I thought I could draw. And then I went, then there was this shop called People Tree in Connaught Place that those days used to have hand-painted T-shirts. To make an extra living and support myself as a student, so I used to go and paint T-shirts there. The owner was that time working on his first graphic novel, which was the first Indian graphic novel called The River of Stories. And he would just casually throw around a mouse and a barefoot Jen. These are days before Persepolis happened. So, and it was fascinating to see stories from our own real lives, and it was great. And that gave me the idea to write my first graphic novel, which was basically my life in an art school, because in Delhi, no one really knows where the College of Art is. And people ask, what do you guys do there? So we draw. So what do you do for 4 years? We keep drawing. Oh, okay, that must be a fascinating life. So, it was quite interesting for me to just talk about art school, because at that point in time, a film had come out called in which Annie gives it to those ones. Yeah. There were very different times, I mean, we had Arundhati Roy, who used to be an actress then. It was a debut film for a guy called Shah Rukh Khan. And the director thought he couldn't act, so they gave him one hand with a plaster so that he couldn't move his hands much. And Shuddhabrata Sengupta used to be an art director.
Wow.
So there were very different times we lived in. So I thought that was a great play. Annie Gives It to Those Ones is a film about students in SPA, which is School of Planning and Architecture. And it's a very fascinating account of these architecture students. So I wanted to do a book like that. But by the time I came out of my college, the entire scene had changed. We were not drawing with hands anymore. Photoshop had come in, and we were so irrelevant. So that book went out with the bathtub. So, and then these books kept happening. So yeah, that's about it.
Before we get into the core theme of partition again, did you really think that a book on partition in graphic format would work? Because again, there is this gap, there is this big gap between a subject like partition and a form like graphic novel. So, did you really believe it when you began?
I think the idea is in the conceiving the book, but it was not a tell-all book about partition per se. We did not need to tell people how partition and why partition happened and what happened during partition. I think that's something we have all grown up with. I mean, if you're living in North India or if you're living in the eastern part of the country, moment you say, "Mere dadaji ne kaha tha," you know what the next part of the narrative is. So, we have all grown up with those stories. But my interest was to look at those stories from the point of view of the children and people who go around telling people कि मेरे दादाजी ने कहा था. Because we have all heard of these stories कि वहाँ पे हमारी लखा दी ज़मीन थी. So, there are other stories within partition that need to be explored, and that's what the whole focus of the book is, not to listen to all that had happened, but the subsequent generations, how they have negotiated with it. So for me, the fascinating part of this book is when a family moves from Delhi to Lahore, and another family moves from Lahore to Delhi, and they have no connection with each other, and the third generation meet in London, and they end up as being roommates, to realize that they have both been talking about the same house. So that's a fascinating coincidence, and that we have that story, you know. So either it's these coincidences that one went looking for.
Okay, so you think that people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s now, how do they relate to partition? Is it something that is part of archives for them, or their connection, as I try to talk about in my introduction, is their connection to partition is made through something like a homegrown fascism that we have that talks about partition in a very different way, or is it made through these stories which inevitably talk about corpses? I heard my partition story from my nanny who saw corpses in Calcutta. So how do we connect, or is it something that we just connect through with this recurring question, who is to be blamed for partition?
No, I
How
don't
do they
think I don't think we connect with partition through fascism. I think that's what we are made to connect. But I don't think on our own individual levels we do that. We do that through food. We do that a lot through food. हम मुल्तानी खाना ऐसा बनाते हैं, हम पेशावरी खाना ऐसा बनाते हैं. That kind of a thing. We do it through languages because we speak in a certain way and these guys speak in a certain way. That keeps happening all the time in Bangla because the Bangladeshi Bangla and the Indian Bangla are so different and yet the same. So we make those connections through them. I was speaking to the other guy, one guy. He's 22, 23, and he said, my parents are from Borishal. Now, he's never been to Borishal in Bangladesh, neither have I. But the fact remains, it's a concept now. So, our places of our homecoming or something are now places of mental constructs, and they are concepts. They are not places that one goes and deals with. I mean, every year there's a huge pilgrimage that happens from Punjab to Pakistan. What Pakistan Lahoris call the tourist season. And they give enormous discounts to Indians because that's the time a lot of people go to Nankana Sahib, a lot of people go and visit their hometowns, and a lot of people go and visit their homes, so to say. So, it's that connection that one works with partition. It's not that jingoistic tricolor waving, t-shirt waving, cricket oriented exuberance that one deals with partition anymore.
And the other thing is that most of the stories about partition have come from the two provinces, the two subas which were partitioned. Yeah. In your book, this is not the limitation. Yeah. So, do you think that there are other kind of partitions? Say, for example, I have met people in Rajasthan, border towns of Rajasthan, who came from the other side of the border, and they have their own stories of partition. So, right. Did you come across partitions within ourselves and outside this territory of two subas?
Well, yeah, before the partition within ourselves, but I think there are a lot of these ignored partitions. For example, we never think of Rajasthan, Gujarat as areas of partition. We never even think that there are stories there. We don't think of Assam as a point of partition. Now, these are also places where, partition happened and got affected, and there are families there. So we have tried to include that. There was this story we have from this lady who moved from Pakistan to India. And it was not a 47 migration. It was somewhere in 65 or 57 migration where she says, she's a Gujarati lady, and she says, India came and took over our villages. So it was during the war that India was trying to lay its claim and Pakistan was trying to lay its vice versa. So at the time they moved, and how they moved overnight, illegally, they stayed here for a while, and then they finally got their status. So for me, that is also a fascinating part of partition. One of the saddest points of partition for me that I tried to work out in the book is the living legacy of partition. For example, the Bihari camps in Bangladesh. Now, a lot of the Bihari Muslims moved from Bihar to Bangladesh side, the eastern part of Pakistan, thinking they're going to Pakistan. In 71, Pakistan becomes Pakistan and it creates another country called Bangladesh. So now they are stranded because this was not what they came for. They came for Pakistan. So now they want to go to Pakistan. They cannot go to Pakistan because Pakistan has disowned them. They cannot come back to India because India has disowned them. Bangladeshis say, we have no connection with you. So they are actually stranded and they are still living in refugee camps. So they don't even call themselves Bangladeshis, they call themselves stranded Pakistanis. So, these are living legacies of partition, and this is something we needed to talk about.
In your introduction also you talked about this idea of how we relate to this notion of territory, and as I said earlier, Pakistan and Bangladesh both in a way were seen as promised lands, and there are people who felt stranded. They found no promised land at all, neither in India, nor in Pakistan, nor in Bangladesh. So when people feel that they are stranded and they belong to no place, what kind of pathologies you came across in these narratives? How do they contrive their own self then?
While working on this book and talking to a lot of the authors and their families, I think a prevalent narrative was that it was an experimental journey for many. Let's go to that side. Let's see if things work out. If they don't work out, we have a place to come back to. The fact that that couldn't happen was a bigger blow than the fact that they had to move. One was a whole set that moved with the bag and baggage forever, but there was another set was just trying to come back, but never could. So I think that is also an important small subset of partition that dhakka that it gave to so many. And we were talking about internal partitions. I mean, what was interesting for me is when I was working and I was contacting a lot of young authors from Bangladesh, a lot of them in their early 30s, early 40s, I can't talk about partition because I was not born during the war. So for them, partition means 71. So it's not anything before that. So, in many ways, the construct of our memories is also linked to these timelines. So, for a lot of the young Bangladeshi authors, it does not begin before 71. So, a lot of Pakistani authors, young Pakistani authors, it does not begin before 47. I was reading this interview many years back when the Pakistani team was here. Inzamamul Haq wanted to visit one of his relatives in UP, but he couldn't. But there was a visa restriction. So, these are the connections we just have left at the conceptual level. And that is the bigger partition for the next generation at least.
I think the most dominant signification in India at least of partition is 47. We generally don't talk about 71 at all because you come from Bengal also. So you kind of in a position to look at this double partition, which the book is also about. There are contributors from all the three countries. So it's a partition in 47, it's a further partition in 71. So there are people who are doubly partitioned in a way, who have doubly partitioned selves also.
Yeah.
So I think you should talk about a bit about those doubly partitioned people.
I met this guy when I was going to Dhaka. He was a driver for the Goethe Institute there. And he was a fascinating story which I wanted to use but I couldn't. He was a guy who moved to Pakistan, the western Pakistan, and he lived there for a working life. And when Bangladesh happened, he took on the Pakistani citizenship because he said, this is where my work is, this is where my life is, I have a house here. So he settled himself in Pakistan. I've never seen someone talking in Urdu with a Bengali accent, which is really funny. So, so we spoke a lot, and he kept coming back to his village in Bangladesh as a tourist, just to see that his property was there. And the day he retired, the next day he moved back to Bangladesh and took up the citizenship there. So he was a fascinating story who took double citizenship at different points of time and kept his own link and negotiated partition.
Yeah.
And so this whole concept of negotiating with partition is something also, for me, was a fascinating piece of learning. So, in that sense, what was your question? Was that
Thank God you lost it anyway. I think we got to move on talking about some other things, like a book on partition in which people would have generally spoken in their own language. They are like translated selves also in a book like this. Most of the writing in India is like, positioning translated selves within a book. So, do you think this book should go out in Indian language and other Indian languages?
I absolutely think this book should go out in Hindi, Urdu, and Bangla for sure.
Punjabi.
And because I feel it'll have a bigger penetration. In fact, one of the reasons we also had other stuff. I didn't want to make it a just IWE kind of a book, because just wanted to include more stories from Bangladesh and Pakistan, which were originally written in Urdu, Bangla, and Hindi, and yeah, and we got some translations done. But this book on its own, I think, merits translations in multiple languages, just for the sheer penetration that it can make into these spaces.
Because I don't know, we don't have a great partition book, a great work of fiction in English in India. We have books in Urdu, we have books in Bengali, we have books in Punjabi, we have books in Hindi, which are proper great partition novels. We don't have a partition book in English as such. I don't remember any. So it's a kind of new thing that you ventured into also, with kind of pioneer book, which is fiction, which is narratives. I'm not talking about studies. And somewhere I feel that there is a kind of Anglophonic and English-centric pressure on the whole scene also. So that's why also perhaps the book should go back where it belongs, into the languages where it should be read.
No, I definitely feel that it should be there in many more languages than English. But having said that, it's also, brings a lot together to have it in English, because, just brings a lot of these narratives into place, because otherwise we would not hear of them. This Bangladeshi boy who's written from a love story from Chittagong, or this author who's written this piece from Lahore. Those probably will not really be, and it's a graphic medium. So, for me, the process was more interesting of working with these languages, and then, anyway, every partition story is a translation, because it's gone through subsequent generations and so many versions, and then it gets written, and then it gets written into English, and then it gets drawn. So for me, there were multiple translations that happened while making this book.
So doing a further retranslation.
Yeah, it's like remixed.
One more thing, a rather technical question. I'm rather curious about it. If you translate a book that is only text, we know how translation happens.
Yeah.
When you translate a book that also has graphics,
Yeah.
so how do you think? Do you have to change graphics when you take it in Hindi? Or the graphics are universal? You don't need to translate them, you don't need to change them for a new audience.
No, I think a man who can read a picture can read it in any language. So I don't think, I will change any drawing to say कि ये हमारे Urdu audience या Punjabi audience को समझ नहीं आएगी. I won't do that, because I think a drawing is a drawing is a drawing. So I will be pretty sure about that. But what I could definitely change is probably the